If you click away now, you'll never know why the Russian Empire burned every document about the Tunguska expedition of 1902, or why the lone survivor spent his final days screaming about serpents the size of trains. This is his confession. They say memory is the first casualty of war, but some memories refuse to die, no matter how deep you bury them. My name is Viktor Volkov, Corporal, 3rd Survey Company, Russian Imperial Army. March of 1902. I'm writing this because the truth deserves to live, even if I cannot. We were 40 men strong when we left Tashkent. Engineers, soldiers, a naturalist from St. Petersburg who'd never fired a rifle in his life. Our mission was simple on paper: map the uncharted marshlands of Central Asia for the Tsar's new railway expansion. The empire was hungry for territory, and railway lines were its teeth. The journey began like any other: dust, heat, the endless rhythm of boots on hard-packed earth. We sang marching songs and complained about rations. Lieutenant Orlov was a by-the-book officer, mustache waxed to perfection, always consulting his compass as if God himself had drawn the maps. Dr. Petrov, our scientific officer, collected plant samples and sketched birds with the enthusiasm of a schoolboy. We were professional, prepared, arrogant. The first village we passed changed everything. It was a Kazakh settlement, maybe 30 families, their yurts clustered like mushrooms near a tributary of the Sir Darya. The children stopped playing when they saw us. Not unusual. Imperial soldiers weren't always welcome. But the elders, their faces held something darker than resentment. Fear. Deep, ancestral fear. Our translator, Timur, was a local man hired in Tashkent. Quiet, competent, with eyes that seemed older than his face. He spoke with the village elder for nearly an hour while we waited, checking our rifles and swatting flies. When he returned, his hands were shaking. "They say we must not go further south," Timur told Lieutenant Orlov. "The water's there. They belong to something older than memory." Orlov laughed. Actually laughed. "Superstitious peasants," he said, waving dismissively. "Tell them we serve the Tsar, not village spirits." But I noticed Timur didn't translate that. He just nodded slowly, and something in his eyes looked like mourning. We pressed deeper into the marsh country. The landscape changed like a fever dream. Solid ground gave way to waterlogged earth, then to channels of black water threading through dense vegetation. Trees grew grotesque here, their roots twisted like arthritic fingers, their branches draped with moss that hung like widows' veils. The air turned thick, humid, tasting of rot and copper. By the second day, our Kazakh guides vanished. Just gone. We woke to find their bedrolls empty, their supplies abandoned. They'd left in the night without a sound, men who knew these lands so well they could navigate in darkness. That should have told us something. "Cowards," Orlov spat. "We continue." And so we did, because soldiers don't question orders, because the Tsar's railroad waited for no man, because we believed our rifles and our maps made us masters of this place. The jungle swallowed us whole on the third day. The canopy closed overhead like a cathedral ceiling, filtering sunlight into sickly green twilight. Strange birds called in languages I'd never heard. The water rose to our knees, then our waists, forcing us to wade in single file, rifles held high. That evening, as we made camp on a rare dry hummock, Private Dmitri pointed to something in the water. At first I thought it was a log, then it moved. A slow, sinuous movement that sent ripples across the surface before vanishing into the depths. "Probably a crocodile," Dr. Petrov said, but his voice lacked conviction. Timur said nothing. He just stared at the water, lips moving in silent prayer. By the third day, the jungle had swallowed us whole, and that's when we found the bones. There are places on Earth where the past refuses to stay buried. The clearing appeared without warning, a break in the endless marsh where the water ran shallow over pale sand. We waded into it gratefully, exhausted from hours of chest-deep slogging. Lieutenant Orlov called a halt to rest, and men collapsed onto their packs, wringing water from their uniforms. That's when we saw what we'd been walking through. Bones, hundreds of them, thousands. They jutted from the water like shipwreck debris, massive, bleached white by time and sun. Ribs curved upward like the arches of a ruined cathedral, each one thick as a man's torso. Vertebrae the size of wagon wheels lay half buried in the silt. And skulls. God, the skulls. Long, tapered, filled with teeth like railroad spikes. Dr. Petrov went mad with excitement. He splashed from bone to bone, measuring, sketching, muttering in academic ecstasy. Prehistoric megafauna, he declared. Perhaps ancient crocodilians or... No, the structure is all wrong. The jaw articulation suggests... He trailed off, confusion creasing his face. Elephants, Orlov said firmly, carried here by some ancient flood, or whales washed inland millennia ago. But I'd seen elephant bones. These were nothing like that. The engineer, Grigory, ran his hand along a massive rib. How does a whale end up in Central Asia? No one had an answer. Timur stood apart from us, ankle deep in water, staring at the bone field with an expression of profound dread. I approached him, keeping my voice low. You know what this place is. It wasn't a question. He turned to me slowly. In the fading light, his face looked gaunt, haunted. The elders call it Yilan Mola, he whispered. The serpent's grave, they say. Before the Mongols, before even the first Khans, something ruled these waters, something that fed on mammoths and giant sloths when this land was still young. Fairy tales, I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Fairy tales don't leave bones, Corporal. That night we camped among the remains. Lieutenant Orlov posted sentries. Standard protocol, though what we expected to encounter in this drowned wilderness, I couldn't imagine. Bandits, hostile tribes, those fears seemed almost quaint now. I drew third watch, 2 hours before dawn. The darkest part of night, when the world feels suspended between death and birth. I stood at the perimeter of our camp, rifle in hand, listening to the jungle breathe. That's when I heard it, a sound like wet canvas dragging over stone, slow, deliberate, massive. I turned, scanning the darkness, finger on my trigger. The bone field stretched before me, black water reflecting starlight in fragmented patterns. Nothing moved. Then the water itself moved, a ripple, starting from somewhere beyond my sight, rolling toward camp in a smooth wave. Not random, purposeful, as if something huge was displacing the water as it passed. I opened my mouth to call the alarm, but the sound died in my throat. Because I saw it then, just for a moment, at the edge of torchlight, a shape in the water, long, impossibly long, moving with the fluid grace of smoke, scales catching the light like obsidian mirrors. Then it was gone. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming that I'd just seen something that shouldn't exist. When I finally found my voice, it came out as a croak. Contact, something in the water. Men scrambled awake, grabbing rifles, forming a perimeter. But the water was still again, empty. What did you see? Orlov demanded. I struggled for words. It was large, very large, moving through the water. Crocodile, he said dismissively, or your imagination. But Timur met my eyes across the camp, and I saw the confirmation there. He'd seen it too, or something like it. Dr. Petrov examined the water's edge at first light, finding nothing but disturbed silt and mud. But I noticed something he didn't, a single scale, the size of my palm, translucent and iridescent, caught on a broken rib bone. I pocketed it without a word. Lieutenant Orlov gave the order to move out at dawn. We should have turned back. But orders are orders, and the Tsar's railroad waits for no man. Nature's monsters leave evidence. We were just too arrogant to read the warning. Dawn came slowly, reluctantly, as if the sun itself feared to illuminate this place. We broke camp in silence. Even the usually talkative engineers said nothing, just checked their equipment with nervous efficiency. The bone field seemed different in daylight, less like an archaeological curiosity and more like a graveyard, a monument to extinction. Or so we thought. We'd been wading south for perhaps 2 hours when Private Alexei, scouting ahead, stopped so suddenly that the man behind him collided into his back. "Bože moi," he whispered. "My God." It hung between the trees like a grotesque banner, a skin translucent and glistening with moisture, draped across branches 20 feet above the waterline. At first, my mind refused to process what I was seeing, too large, too impossible. But there it was, a shed snakeskin, complete and intact, stretching from tree to tree in a serpentine curve that seemed to go on forever, 40 meters long, maybe more. The scales caught morning light in rainbow patterns, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Near the head section, the eye holes gaped like empty windows, large enough to fit my fist through. Dr. Petrov made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. My God, it's real. A living specimen of prehistoric proportions. We have to document this. We have to leave, Timur said flatly. Now. This is a sign, a warning. A warning? Orlov scoffed. It's the scientific discovery of the century. Petrov, get your camera. Sir, I said carefully, if something shed this skin, where is it now? The question hung in the humid air. Orlov's smile faltered. Snakes shed their skin regularly, Dr. Petrov said, but his voice shook. This could be months old, years old. I reached up, touching the edge of the skin where it hung lowest. It was still damp, soft, recent. Days old, I said quietly. Maybe hours. That's when Private Dmitri and Corporal Yevgeny asked permission to scout ahead. Claimed they saw something, needed to check the route. Orlov granted it, distracted by Petrov's frantic documentation efforts. The two men took a small boat we'd been dragging, pushing off into deeper water with visible relief. They wanted out. Can't say I blamed them. We heard their screams an hour later. The sound carried across the water like sirens, raw, primal terror cut short by a sound I'll never forget. A wet crunch, like a tree trunk snapping, followed by silence so complete it felt obscene. "Form up!" Orlov shouted. "Weapons ready!" We found their boat drifting in a lazy circle 100 meters downstream, or what remained of it. The wooden hull had been crushed inward, splintered like kindling, as if caught in a massive press. Puncture marks, 4 of them, each as wide as my arm, pierced clean through the wood. Of Dmitri and Yevgeny there was no sign, just blood in the water, already dispersing into pink clouds. "What could do this?" Grigory whispered, running his finger along one of the puncture marks. "A bear? Crocodile?" "Teeth," Dr. Petrov said, his scientific detachment crumbling. Those are teeth marks." The water around us suddenly felt very deep, very dark. Timur began praying in Kazakh, a rapid, desperate litany. 3 soldiers wanted to turn back immediately. Orlov threatened them with court-martial, but his hand shook on his pistol grip. "We continue," he said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "We're Imperial soldiers. We don't run from animals." But this wasn't an animal, not in any conventional sense. That night, as we camped on a mud bank, I showed the scale I'd found to Dr. Petrov. He examined it under lamplight, turning it over in his trembling fingers. "The structure is consistent with modern pythons," he said slowly. "But the size... Victor, if this came from the creature that shed that skin, we're dealing with a specimen that dwarfs anything in the fossil record. The largest Titanoboa fossils ever found suggest animals 15 meters long. This is 3 times that size. It shouldn't be possible. It shouldn't be alive." "But it is," I said. He looked at me with hollow eyes. "Yes, God help us, it is." That's when Lieutenant Orlov gave the order I'll regret for the rest of my life. Find the nest. Some places remember gods older than the ones we pray to. The drag marks appeared at dawn, impossibly wide grooves in the mud, cutting through the marsh like roads built by titans. Each track was wide enough for a man to lie across, pressed deep into the earth by unimaginable weight. They led south, always south, toward water so black it looked like liquid night. "We follow them," Orlov commanded, his voice carrying a manic edge. 2 men dead, and instead of retreat, he wanted to track the thing that killed them. Pride is a soldier's worst enemy, worse than any bullet. Dr. Petrov agreed enthusiastically, all scientific curiosity and no survival instinct. "Think of it, gentlemen, the last of the megafauna, a living window into the Paleocene epoch." "Think of it eating us," Private Grigory muttered, but not loud enough for the officers to hear. We followed those terrible tracks for 3 hours. The jungle grew denser, older, the trees twisted into shapes that seemed almost purposeful, like clawed hands reaching toward a drowned sky. The water deepened until we were waist-high again, our uniforms heavy and sodden, rifles held overhead like offerings. Then the ruins emerged from the gloom. At first I thought it was a natural formation, stone rising from the black water in jagged angles. But no, this was architecture, ancient architecture. A temple, half collapsed and entirely submerged except for its highest points, drowning slowly in the marsh. The stones were covered in carvings. Serpents, hundreds of them, carved in relief across every visible surface. Serpents coiled around human figures, serpents swallowing the sun, serpents emerging from the earth like terrible gods. And in the center, above what must have once been the main entrance, a massive carved head, a snake's head, jaws open, eyes inlaid with stones that still caught the light after countless centuries. "Pre-Mongol," Dr. Petrov breathed, wading closer. "Maybe even pre-Turkic. This predates any known civilization in the region." Timur stopped at the threshold, refusing to go further. "This is Yilan Anna's temple," he said, voice flat. "The mother serpent. The old peoples worshipped her as a goddess. They fed her, and when they stopped," he gestured at the ruins, "she fed herself." Fascinating local mythology, Petrov dismissed, already clambering over broken stones. But I felt it. That primal instinct that evolution hardwired into our ancestors. This place was wrong. Holy, perhaps, but holy in a way that predated human concepts of divinity. This was a shrine to something older, hungrier. We followed the drag marks into the temple's interior, a vast chamber open to the sky where the roof had collapsed centuries ago. The water here was still, reflecting our torchlight in perfect mirror clarity. And that's when we found them. Eggs. Dozens of them. They lay in a careful cluster on a raised stone platform that barely cleared the waterline. Each one the size of an oil barrel, the shells leathery and pale, pulsing with internal movement. Not the stillness of stone, but the rhythmic flecks of life preparing to emerge. Dr. Petrov actually wept. "Eggs," he whispered, touching one with reverent fingers. "She's breeding. Actively breeding. This isn't an extinction event, it's an incubation chamber." I watched those eggs flex and pulse, and nausea rose in my throat. Because if something laid eggs this large, how big was the mother? "We need to document everything," Orlov commanded, his earlier fear replaced by visions of glory. Medals, recognition, a chapter in history books with his name in bold type. "Set up camp here. Petrov, get your equipment. This is the discovery that will put our expedition in the Imperial Museum." "Sir," I started, but he cut me off. "That's an order, Corporal." So we made camp in that drowned temple, surrounded by eggs the size of children, beneath carvings of serpents consuming mankind. Soldiers set up tents on the few dry platforms. Petrov arranged his cameras and measuring equipment with shaking hands. Fear and excitement mixed until they became indistinguishable. Timur sat apart from us, back against a carved pillar, muttering prayers in a language older than Russian. As night fell, the jungle came alive with sounds. Screeching birds, howling wind, the constant drip of water on stone. But beneath it all, I heard something else. A rhythm. Low, steady. Like a heartbeat the size of a house. The water began to ripple. "Sir," I said urgently, "we need to—" The egg nearest to me flexed violently. Something inside pressed against the shell, a shape that was all coils and hunger. Then another egg moved. And another. They were hatching. We never saw her approach. Only the wake, a wall of water taller than a man. They say hell is other people. They're wrong. Hell is when nature reminds you that humans were never apex predators. The water exploded. That's the only way to describe it. One moment, stillness, the jungle holding its breath. The next, a detonation of water and ancient rage that sent waves crashing against the temple walls, extinguishing half our torches in an instant. She rose from the depths like a living nightmare made flesh. The Titanoboa, Yilan Anna, the mother. 45 meters of prehistoric fury, scales black as a volcanic glass, each one the size of a dinner plate. Her body was thick as a rail car, muscles rippling beneath that obsidian hide with power that belonged to earthquakes, not animals. When she raised her head, God, her head was the size of a carriage, jaw unhinged to reveal fangs as long as my forearm, curved like sabers and yellow with age. But it was her eyes that destroyed me. Yellow, luminous, intelligent. She wasn't a mindless beast. She was a mother protecting her nest. And we were the intruders. "Fire!" Orlov screamed, and the temple erupted with gunfire. Rifles cracked in desperate staccato, muzzle flashes illuminating the nightmare in strobing snapshots. Bullets struck her scales and ricocheted, sparking off her hide like stones off armor. We might as well have been shooting at a battleship. She moved with impossible speed for something so massive. Her tail whipped through the water, creating a wave that swept 3 men off their feet. I watched Private Yuri disappear under the black water, screaming, dragged down by the current and his waterlogged equipment. He never surfaced. The mother struck like lightning. Lieutenant Orlov stood on the temple platform, emptying his revolver into her face, shouting orders that no one could hear over the chaos. She lunged forward, jaws opening impossibly wide, and simply took him. One moment he was there, defiant and doomed. The next, he was gone, consumed so quickly that his final scream was still echoing as she swallowed. "Run!" someone shouted. Maybe me, maybe everyone. But there was nowhere to run. The temple had become an arena, and she was the gladiator. Dr. Petrov, mad with scientific fervor even in the face of death, tried to photograph her. He stood on a crumbling wall, camera raised, flash powder igniting as she turned toward him. I saw the photograph happen, the flash illuminating those yellow eyes that opened maw the moment before oblivion. Her tail swept the wall. Petrov flew 15 feet, struck a pillar, and crumpled. I found his body later, or half of it. The camera was still clutched in his severed hand, shattered, film exposed and ruined. She coiled around the temple like a serpent claiming its domain. Men died in that embrace, crushed inside their own armor, ribs snapping like dry twigs, lungs punctured by their own bones. Corporal Alexei fired his rifle until it clicked empty, then tried to fix his bayonet. She caught him mid-charge, wrapped around him like a constricting python, and we all heard the sounds. God help me. We heard everything. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. Grigory, Timur, and 10 others had the same idea. We fled into the interior of the temple, through a collapsed archway into a smaller chamber where the ceiling was still intact. Stone walls, solid, defensible. Behind us, the massacre continued. I could hear the screams, the sound of bodies breaking, the splash of blood hitting water. She took half our company in minutes, 20 men reduced to meat and terror. We barricaded the doorway with broken stones and fallen timbers, piling anything we could find into a desperate wall. Outside she circled. I could see her shadow through gaps in the stone, an endless coil of darkness, moving around and around the temple, searching for entry points. "She's too big," Grigori whispered, hysterical hope in his voice. "She can't fit through the door. We're safe. We're—" A section of wall exploded inward, not the door, the wall itself. Her head forced through, stones crumbling like sand under that battering ram of a skull. She couldn't fit entirely, but she didn't need to. That massive head thrust into our sanctuary, jaws snapping, yellow eyes burning with intelligence and rage. We pressed against the far wall, firing wildly. Private Dmitri tried to stab her with his bayonet. She caught him by the leg, dragged him screaming toward her jaws, and I turned away. Some things you don't need to see twice. When she finally withdrew, 6 more men were gone. 13 of us remained in that stone coffin, surrounded by death, listening to her move outside, circling, waiting, patient. Timur looked at me with hollow eyes. 3 days, he whispered. That's how long it takes the eggs to hatch. 3 days. I looked at the calendar date on my water-damaged watch, March 17, 1902. We were trapped for 3 days and 3 nights. And then the eggs started hatching. Monsters aren't born cruel, they're born hungry. Day 1 in that stone tomb. We counted heads, 13 survivors. Counted ammunition, barely 200 rounds. Counted days until the eggs hatched, 3. The mathematics of survival are brutally simple when written in blood. Outside, the mother circled. We could track her movement by the ripples in water that seeped through the walls, by the vibration in stone when she passed close. She was in no hurry. Why would she be? We were trapped. She was patient, and her children were nearly ready to feed. Private Grigori had a broken arm from being thrown against the wall. Corporal Pavel had taken a glancing blow from her tail, 3 ribs cracked, coughing blood. We had no medical supplies beyond vodka and prayer. The vodka ran out first. "She's intelligent," Timur said on the 2nd day, watching those massive shadows pass outside. "This isn't animal behavior. She's thinking, planning." "Don't anthropomorphize it," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "I'm not. I'm stating fact. The old stories say Yilan Anna was old when humans learned to walk upright. She survived ice ages, floods, extinctions that wiped out everything around her. You don't survive that long being stupid." On the 3rd day, the eggs began to move. We heard them first, a scratching sound, leathery and wet, echoing through the temple chamber. Then came the cracking, shells breaking, new sounds emerging, hissing, hungry, eager. "They're hatching," I whispered. Timur closed his eyes. God forgive us. The first hatchling found our chamber just after midnight. It came through a gap in the wall we hadn't even noticed, a crack where stones had settled unevenly. The young serpent was small, only compared to its mother. Still 7 meters long, thick as a man's torso, scales bright and new like freshly forged metal. But it was fast. So terribly fast. Private Mikhail was on watch. The snake struck before he could cry out, wrapped around him in an instant, constricting with the mindless efficiency of instinct. We heard his bones break in the darkness, a sound like green wood snapping. By the time we got torches lit, he was dead and the hatchling was feeding. We killed it. It took 15 bullets and 3 bayonets, but we killed it. The young snake thrashed in its death throes, spraying blood across the walls, hot, copper-smelling, wrong. "1 down," Grigori said, panting. "How many eggs were there? 20? 30? No one answered. They came through the walls after that. 2, 3 at a time, squeezing through gaps we couldn't block, driven by newborn hunger and their mother's rage. The chamber became an abattoir, Serpents striking from shadows, men screaming, gunfire in enclosed space until our ears bled from the concussion. Private Dmitri was dragged through a window crack, screaming for help we couldn't give. Corporal Alexei fought one with his bayonet in close quarters. It swallowed him alive, and we watched the bulge of his body move down its throat, still struggling, until it stopped. We burned everything combustible. Maps, documents, money, prayer books, anything that would make flame. Because they feared fire. The hatchlings would recoil from burning brands, hissing in what might have been pain, or might have been ancient memory of forest fires and volcanic eruptions. By dawn of the fourth day, 7 of us remained. We stood in a circle, backs together, holding torches with trembling hands, watching shadows writhe at the edges of light. That's when Timur spoke. "There's a way," he said quietly. "The old way. Blood draws her away. Blood in the water makes her hunt elsewhere, away from the nest." "We're already bleeding," I said. "It hasn't worked. Not our blood. A willing sacrifice. The old stories are clear. Yilan Anna respects tribute. She'll accept trade. You can't mean..." He met my eyes, smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen since we entered this cursed place. "Tell my family I died protecting something important." Before any of us could stop him, Timur drew his knife across his own throat. Deep, professional. The kind of cut you make when you don't want second chances. Blood poured down his chest. He walked to the pool of black water that seeped into our chamber, knelt, and let it flow, crimson ribbons dispersing into darkness. "I'm sorry," I whispered, but he was already gone. The mother stirred. We felt it through the floor, a massive shifting, a change in the water's pattern. She was moving, following that blood trail downstream, away from the temple, hunting. Timur had bought us a chance. A window. Timur bought us a chance. We ran. But some things follow you forever. Survival isn't the end of horror. Sometimes it's just the beginning. 6 of us crawled from that temple like men emerging from their own graves. Grigory, Pavel, Yuri, Konstantin, Nikolai, and me. We moved through water turned red with old blood, past bodies floating face down, past the scattered remains of an expedition that had started with such confidence. We didn't speak. Speech required energy we no longer possessed. The jungle had changed in those 4 days, or maybe we had. Every shadow held teeth. Every ripple in the water promised death. We moved like sleepwalkers, rifles clutched in white-knuckled grips, eyes hollow and staring. On the second day, Grigory started laughing. Not the good kind, the broken kind. "Beautiful," he kept saying, staring at the black water. "The mother is so beautiful. Don't you see? She's beautiful." "Grigory, shut up," Pavel hissed. But he wouldn't stop, couldn't stop. That night he stood watch. In the morning he was gone, just footprints leading back toward the swamp, back toward the temple, back toward her. We heard his laughter echo across the water an hour later. Then the sound of crushing bones. Then silence. 5 of us. We staggered northeast, following rivers we hoped would lead to civilization. The maps were gone, ruined, or lost. We navigated by sun and desperation, eating roots that made us vomit, drinking water that gave us fever. Pavel died on day 6, infection from his broken ribs, turning his blood to poison. We buried him in the mud because we were still human enough to care. 4 of us. On day 8, we reached the Sirdarya River, civilization. We collapsed on the bank and wept like children. A Cossack border patrol found us 3 hours later. 4 skeletal men in rotted uniforms, raving about monsters and temples and serpents as long as trains. They took us to the military hospital in Tashkent, fed us soup, gave us clean beds. And then the officers came. Imperial intelligence. Cold-eyed men in pressed uniforms who asked questions and didn't believe answers. They interrogated us separately, looking for inconsistencies in our stories. Found none. That seemed to disturb them more. "Where's the rest of your company?" "Dead." "Dead how?" "Killed." "By what?" "How do you explain?" How do you make someone believe in prehistoric nightmares when they've never seen anything more dangerous than a bureaucrat's pen? "A large snake," I said finally. "Extremely large." They sent a recovery team, 40 fresh soldiers with modern equipment, led by a colonel who'd never seen combat and thought Central Asia was a tourist destination. They returned 3 weeks later, found nothing. No temple, no ruins, no bones, no eggs, no evidence we'd ever been there except for some old boot prints in the mud. The entire valley was just black water and silence. "Swamp gas," the official report concluded. "Collective hallucination brought on by malaria and dehydration. No evidence of hostile action." Our testimony was sealed, marked classified, then buried so deep it might as well have been fiction. They discharged us quietly. Medical retirement, small pensions, polite suggestions that we not discuss our experiences in public. We went our separate ways after that, tried to rebuild lives from the wreckage of our sanity. Constantine drowned in his bathtub 6 months later. Doors locked from inside, no signs of struggle, just drowned. Yuri choked to death in his sleep a year after that. Autopsy found nothing in his throat, but the coroner said it looked like he'd been constricted, crushed from the outside in. Nikolai was pulled into the Moscow River in the spring of 1904. Witnesses said he was walking along the embankment when he suddenly screamed and dove into the water. They found his body 3 days later, downstream, broken like he'd been squeezed by a giant fist, always near water. Always that same method. Constriction, drowning, crushing. I'm the last one now. The last witness to Yilan Mola. The last man who saw the mother and lived long enough to grow old. I moved inland after Nikolai died. Far from rivers, far from swamps. I drink only from wells. I never bathe in anything I can't see the bottom of. But I know she's still out there. Somewhere in those flooded jungles, guarding her nest, raising her children, waiting. I am the last. And I am telling you this because the world must know. We did not imagine her. Some stories survive their storytellers. Some warnings outlive the warned. My name is Viktor Volkov, and I am dying. It's October 1947. I'm 83 years old, sitting in a small apartment in Kiev, far from any body of water larger than a puddle. My hands shake too much to hold a pen for long, so I dictate this to my granddaughter, who thinks I'm telling her fairy tales. Maybe I am. Maybe the line between truth and legend blurs when you've lived this long. 45 years since that cursed expedition. 45 years of nightmares where yellow eyes watch me from dark water. 45 years knowing I'm next on her list. Because she remembers. I know she does. Apex predators always remember threats to their young. After the war, the Great War they call it now, though which Great War there have been so many. The Soviets built their railway lines anyway. Stalin's engineers pushed into those marshlands with tractors and dynamite, draining swamps, building tracks, connecting empire to empire. Workers vanished, always the ones assigned to the southern routes, near what the locals still call the drowned forest. Official reports blame accidents, desertion, bandits. But the pattern is clear to anyone who wants to see it. They disappear near water, always without trace, and their bodies are never found. Or when they are, they're crushed, broken, as if squeezed by something impossibly strong. The locals know. The Kazakhs and Turkmen and Uzbeks who've lived on those lands since before Russia had a name, they still whisper about Yilanana. They still leave offerings at the water's edge. Goats, chickens, sometimes just bread and salt. Tribute to the old goddess who refuses to die. I've studied history in my twilight years, learned things that make me wonder. Those temple ruins we found, I did research, asked archaeologists, searched for anything about pre-Turkic snake cults in Central Asia. Found references going back 3,000 years, 4,000. Further, the Sumerians wrote about Tiamat, the chaos serpent. The Hindus spoke of Shesha, the cosmic serpent that holds the world. The Aztecs worshipped Quetzalcoatl. Every ancient culture has serpent gods, every one. What if they weren't myths? What if they were memories? Remnants of a time when things like the mother weren't prehistoric fossils but living realities. Apex predators humans had to negotiate with, tribute to, worship. What if the Titanoboa never went extinct? What if a few survived in the deep places, the flooded places, the forgotten places? Breeding slowly, living long, outlasting empires. I believe that now. I believe she was old when we found her. Maybe centuries old, maybe older. I believe she's still out there, still protecting her nest, still feeding on the arrogant men who think their maps and railways give them dominion over ancient things. My granddaughter asks me why I'm telling her this. What's the point of a scary story about a snake from before I was born? The point is this, child. There are places on Earth that don't belong to us. Never did. Never will. Places where older things hold dominion, where nature's laws still apply despite our concrete and steel. Respect the borders. Respect the blood. And when the locals tell you to turn back, when the elders with ancient eyes speak warnings in voices that carry the weight of generations, listen. Don't be like Lieutenant Orlov, who thought his uniform made him invincible. Don't be like Dr. Petrov, who thought scientific curiosity justified any risk. Don't be like me, young and stupid, who followed orders into hell because I was too proud to admit fear. The railway lines run through that region now. Trains pass through daily, carrying goods and passengers from east to west, west to east. Most of the time, nothing happens. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, a train stops. The engineer reports something on the tracks, something large. By the time they investigate, it's gone. And sometimes, in villages near the drowned forest, children disappear near the water. Livestock vanishes. Fishermen don't come home. The locals know. They've always known. The Soviets dismiss it as superstition. The bureaucrats file reports about agricultural accidents and drowning incidents. But I know. God help me, I know. I still dream of those yellow eyes watching from the depths. I still wake screaming about temples and eggs and the sound of bones breaking in the darkness. I'm dying now. Cancer, the doctors say, though they don't understand why I refuse treatment near any hospital with running water. I know she's coming for me. The last witness. The last man who saw her and lived. She's patient, but patient doesn't mean forgiving. So I write this down. I tell this story to anyone who will listen. Not for glory. There's no glory in surviving while better men died. Not for redemption. Some sins can't be absolved. But for warning. If you ever find yourself in the marshlands of Central Asia, near the black waters they call the drowned forest, and the locals tell you stories about Yilan Ana, believe them. And if you see ripples in still water, ripples that move with purpose and intelligence, that seem to circle and watch and remember, run. She's still out there, the mother, the goddess, the last of the Titans. And she remembers every slight, every intrusion, every man who dared disturb her ancient peace. I hear water running in the next apartment. Just pipes, just normal building sounds. But it sounds like the drowned forest. It sounds like circling. It sounds like coming home. My granddaughter asks if the story has a happy ending. I smile and lie and say yes. Because she's young and she deserves to believe in happy endings a little while longer. But the truth is that some stories don't end. They just wait in deep water, coiled and patient, for the next fool who doesn't respect the old borders. I am the last witness. When I die, this story becomes legend. And legends are easy to dismiss. That's what she's waiting for. This story is inspired by documented wartime reports of Russian Imperial expeditions into Central Asia, 1890s-1900s, blended with Kazakh and Turkic folklore about ancient serpent deities, and dramatized for narrative purposes. The Titanoboa genus existed 58 million years ago, but is considered extinct in the scientific record. This narrative is a work of speculative horror fiction,